Please now welcome David Welton, who will offer a question on behalf of Bend Yes in My Backyard, otherwise known as Bend YIMBY.
Hello, thank you for taking the time to be here this evening. So Oregon's nearly 50-year-old land use laws are unlikely to change much in the near future, meaning that a significant portion for housing must come from growing up and in, as opposed to only growing out. What additional kinds of specific reforms would you support to legalize, but not require, to make efficient use of land inside Bend's UGB? Ideas might include, but are not limited to, upzoning more areas, re-legalizing more housing types throughout Bend, minimum lot size reform, other things.
All right, each candidate's going to have 1 minute to answer this question. We're going to begin with Megan Perkins, and we will end with Gina Franzosa.
So yes, I am in support of targeted UGB expansion, but we need to build houses of all shapes and sizes, and we need to build up, not just out in our community. We are 6,000 homes underbuilt in Bend, and building single-family homes out in rural Deschutes County isn't going to solve the problem. It's also going to come with added infrastructure costs and a huge environmental impact. So I am all for looking at any solutions that we can find that encourage us to densify our city. I believe that the governor and the state is on board with this. There are some mandates that we are going to have to achieve over the next few years in order to build what we need to build and build the way that that is the future of Bend, which is up, as well as targeted UGB expansions. I think we can do all that without blowing up the land use system.
Megan, thank you. Nick?
Yeah, so the land use system was designed for west of the mountains, especially the exclusive farm use. And no, you don't have to expand the infrastructure out there, and it doesn't have to be part of city costs. So it can be in a much better way to appeal to the people that actually do a lot of the construction, those types of jobs, a lot of the nurses and a lot of the policemen. They could actually live out there by choice, or they could find cheaper land within, or cheaper property in Bend. You can do this, especially with reforming how we develop within 3rd Street and Greenwood. There's a lot of commercial properties there that are just right for smaller rental properties. That's something that could be approved by a local bank, even a community credit union can actually approve that, versus the 1,600 unit that just got rejected because it no longer pencils, because we're in a bit of a turnover in our market. So that just means 1,600 people are not going to have homes, and that is something that I want to prove that. So we can go out, not in an urban sprawl, but a rural sprawl, with actually tackling that issue of saying land use laws are unlikely to change.
Barb?
I've been focusing my attention on infill, the very tiniest infill projects, which are accessory dwelling units. I'm happy to know that we have another free plan to be able to build an ADU, and it seems like this one even comes with like tips of how to get it completed. The other opportunity is people's garages, people's spare bedrooms. There absolutely are ways that we can help people who are trying to pay these exorbitant mortgages. They can help pay their mortgage. They can provide a little bit more housing to the community. And then as far as building up goes, it really, it's been a lot of years trying to listen to developers, frankly, builders, what's going on. And it really seems to me like elevators are a real linchpin to this. Elevators cost a fortune to build in the first place, and they have ongoing maintenance costs.
Barb, thank you.
You
Steve?
bet.
I went to school at the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. And let me tell you, the Front Range has changed dramatically over the last 35 years. It used to be individual towns, and now it's sprawled all the way between Colorado Springs and Denver. It's not what I wanted. When Catherine and I moved here, we moved here because of the UGB system in part, and because of the beautiful nature of this city. So the system is designed to incentivize growing up and growing in first, and I'm a fan of that system. Now, I will support reforms that help increase that infill or that densification as appropriate. I do think that it should be easier for individual homeowners and landowners to subdivide their lots. I do think it should be easier for them to get an ADU built and approved. And so to that end, I think those are strategies that can help us even inside the system. Thank you.
Steve, thank you. Chet?
Everybody's talking about up versus out and out versus up. The truth is that we're probably going to be doing both. And we have to figure out a way to effectively implement plans for both. If we're going to grow out, and we are, then we need to find a way to fund that infrastructure. If we're going to go up, I love the idea of ADUs. I happen to have built my own ADU during the pandemic. It was not easy. The plans took a long time to get back to me. I think I was in the planning stage for 6 months or so. It was costly. I would like to see that streamlined. If we're going to increase density, then we need to incentivize that behavior. And then the other big piece of this, if we're going to be moving up, then we need to have on-site parking. I don't care what the state says. Traffic is an issue in Bend, and it's only going to become a bigger issue if we have more density. So as a city, we need to require on-site parking.
Thank you. Megan?
Yes, so I think we have great policies that the governor in the housing crisis has started to implement. We have middle housing, which has allowed us to densify, and it's encouraged builders to densify. And then we also have Senate Bill 458, which has allowed us to subdivide larger lots, and that's a really innovative way. We need to keep on innovating to increase the amount of housing. I'm also really excited what's coming in the pipe with the climate-friendly and equitable communities. I think we're going to have some great opportunities to densify even further, and we have to make sure that it is aligning with our housing needs analysis.
Megan, thank you. Jonathan?
Yeah, like I said before, we need to keep going outwards. We need to maintain the way Bend is. Because if we start building up, we're going to start getting a lot of empty apartment, complex. No one's going to be coming here no more. A lot of people are moving here on a regular basis because the way Bend is. And if we keep building more density, we're going to keep getting more traffic, especially with all these back lanes we're adding on that's wasting time and focus of the city, and let alone waste of money. We need to be focusing more on expanding the city, and especially out into the desert. It's extremely easy to do. We could be working with developers, preferably more local developers instead of California ones, where they screw us over and the city council bend to their will when they don't like what's on the fine print. We need to focus on expanding outwards where everyday people can build houses too, not just big developers. We need to be able to allow people to buy a plot of land and build their own houses, be able to do what they want with it.
Jonathan, thank you. Gina?
Thank you. This is a really important question because as I said earlier, there are 2,500 acres of land within the urban growth boundary that we have right now to build in. I believe that there are barriers in our development code. Our development code is simply too complicated to use, and it is not designed to build infill. It's designed to build the sprawl that we're unfortunately experiencing. There are many opportunities by making modifications to our development code. For example, there's no reason why we can't allow 2 ADUs on a lot versus 1. There's also a requirement where if you build more than 4 units, you have to go through a planning approval process, which causes a lot of extra time and a lot of extra expense to developers. So I think major overhaul of our development code is really needed, and that's one of the core tenets actually of my platform, and it's going to be a priority of mine when I serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. And thank you, David. All right, now I'd like to introduce Julie Bostrom, who will ask the candidates a question on behalf of the Oregon Nurses Association. Hi.
So I've been a nurse at St. Charles for 25 years, and I'm here representing all of them. So as nurses, we know from within our own profession and from the populations that we serve that the housing costs and lack of availability are having a negative impacts on the physical and mental health of our community members as well. We need more affordable rentals throughout Bend for both essential workers like nurses and for the low-income community members making 60% of area median income and below. What strategies would you propose to increase available rental housing, especially for affordable to lower income members of our community?
So each candidate is going to have 2 minutes to answer this question. We're going to begin with Nick Sereni, and we will end with Megan Perkins. And whenever you're ready.
Okay. So I'll start from what I really like and then end at what I don't like as much. Building height and local construction. I'd like to see it to go back to limiting the height of buildings. I'd like to see, just like I said before, a lot of reuse of the commercial spaces that are on 3rd Street and Greenwood that are they're kind of antiquated and they're no longer meeting the needs of the community. You can maintain that commercial space or get rid of it and then have a 3-story apartment complex right on 3rd Street of Greenwood, and that would meet the needs for the single occupancy homes. That'd get a lot of people out of the houses that are sharing and they're paying like $2,000 a month or $1,000 a month with 4 to 5 other people in a single family home. That home would then be available for single families. And then expedited permitting. So I like to take back the Domino's theme, 30 days or it's free. So if they can't get the permit approved in 30 days, it's free. Done. SDC fees need to be SDC fees need to be tied to demand. So if there's a high demand in housing like there is today, we have next to 0 SDC fees. We figure out how to pay for it, but that's really important to meet the need. And then they increase as the demand goes down, right? That way you can actually, so you don't accidentally overbuild and price people outside of the market. And then probably the least favorite, but it's something to consider, and I got this, an unoccupied property tax. So this would go after any kind of speculation or vacation homes that, and you know, this is a hard one because I do know people that have vacation homes here, but the reality is if the house sits vacant for 9 months out of the year, they're using resources, but we're not really collecting that revenue from them that we get from somebody actually occupying it. So just recouping that cost by charging them an unoccupied property tax, I think would go a long way. And I think it's about 20% of the homes in Bend actually fit that bill, which could actually solve the housing problem just by itself. That's all.
Thank you. Barb.
100% agree on empty house tax. I personally think that is at the top of my list for the very worst use for a home. I actually can think of a good use for a vacation rental, for a short-term rental. St. Charles depends upon traveling nurses, traveling healthcare workers. My own husband was a traveling respiratory therapist, and I remember one time he turned down a contract because it was 3 months, and he wasn't gonna have any place to live for 3 months. So we have actively been trying to connect people who have vacation rentals because they might be full in the summer, but what about the rest of the year? Trying to connect them with folks like traveling nurses, trying to connect them, maybe they might even consider doing long-term rental. The other idea I had, and this goes back to ADUs in individual lots, is trying to connect the homeowner with the end user. It seems to me like people who are in the position of having the space and having the resources, if it's their own mother-in-law, they'll build the thing. If it's their own child, if it's somebody they know, they'll go ahead and take that risk and build it. And it seems like there might be a way where we could connect that homeowner who has that opportunity with a nurse, with a firefighter, with a police officer, with a teacher, even with a bartender, for heaven's sakes. There are a lot of people in this city who believe bartenders are essential workers. So, me too. We've both been bartenders. So, you know, I do think there are creative opportunities out there. And then as far as getting hundreds of units built, right now we're trying for a tiny TIF program. And this is a tax abatement, but you have to build affordable housing to be eligible for this tax abatement. Curious to see how it goes. Thanks.
Steve.
Julie, thanks for what you do. Appreciate it. As a fellow service provider, I appreciate that. In my classroom, cost burden is reflected on the faces of my students. That insecurity, if they're not able to have a stable situation, I see it. They're not ready to learn, and that affects their outcomes. So, golly, it's something we got to work on. Living cost burden, spending more than 30% of your income on a house is not sustainable over the long term. And what are you going to do? You're going to have to leave. You're going to have to leave the city, and that's not good for anyone. And the thought that many of my students can't even dream of purchasing a home in the city where they go to school is heartbreaking to me. So I understand the challenges that a lot of my educators are facing right here. Heck, we have a hard time hiring first term new teachers because they're at 60% of the AMI. They can't afford to live in here. And so what we need to do is we need to get more of these multifamily and rental housing in here because that's an important part of the whole housing continuity, particularly, or continuum rather, particularly if you're just moving into the area. And I think the council's done some great work on increasing the amount of housing stock in that sector and have actually stabilized the rent for the first time in quite some time. So good, well done. But I do think that we need to continue to look at something like the Affordable Housing Fund that revolves, and we continue to support that because that's a valuable lever that we can pull. I also think where we can incentivize multifamily projects, that's going to be helpful, as mentioned through the tax incentive program right here, or shortening our code and our approval code. So you got to live in Bend when you work in Bend. Thanks.
Steve, thank you. Chet?
Number one, in my opinion, has to be ADUs. It enables our citizens to become tiny entrepreneurs all on their own. It also increases the quality of the knit of our community. If I happen to have a nurse moving into my ADU this week, so when we do that, we increase the intimacy between us and the people who we are serving. The big issue that we have right now is that the Planning Commission has gone full steam ahead on ultra high income housing and state subsidized low income housing for the past 10 years. That's the big problem. They have left the middle class behind, and this is a shame. We are losing the middle class here in Bend, and we can't survive without them. I spend a lot of time sitting out in front of the Bend Library near downtown, and I get to talk to all kinds of different people from all over town. I even get to talk to city workers sometimes. An engineer came by the other day, and I said, hey, how can we streamline the process about to enable home builders to get their plans on the street more quickly? He said the biggest issue that we have is builders who make big promises and then can't deliver on them. So if you're coming in to buy a home and they promise you things that the city definitely doesn't allow, once that plan gets kicked back, they blame the city. And then it clogs up the whole system for everybody else. His proposition, and I really like this one, is to have a two-tiered system. So we've got one slow line for the developers who make high promises and can't deliver, and we have another line for folks who make promises and follow through.
Chet, thank you.
Yep.
Megan?
First of all, thank you for your service. I think it's so important that we find people who are caring for our loved ones deserve to live in Bend. And we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to help find our nurses housing, as well as many other first responders in our workforce. So I want to make sure, and I'm open to looking at workforce-specific housing. I think that that's something that is really worthwhile to explore. I'm also really proud of the work that the City Council has done on the $5 million in HUD funds. And so we need to make sure that that is going to the 60% AMI and below, and also that we are using those funds to leverage additional funds. Once you receive those federal funds, they can help leverage more. And I think people mentioned before the tax increment financing. I think that that's really interesting. It'll focus on projects 90% AMI and below. And we really need to be doing more innovating like that. I'm really proud of the work that I've done as part of my day job in getting multifamily housing on the ground that's focusing on 80% AMI, and we need to be doing more about that. And we also need to be looking at public-private partnerships and really making sure that we're asking our private and our business community to come to the table as well.
Megan, thank you. Jonathan?
First I want to say what Nick said about the 30 days thing, that's actually extremely key for permits, because the government, the local government is working fast enough on that. If we were to make that speed, it would be a lot better. Things would get done faster. Also, with the 20% vacancy vacation homes, that's a phenomenal solution if people start taxing them. Once again, though, to be quite honest, rental units, or let's be real, they're the same prices, if not maybe a couple $100 less than someone's mortgage on a house. If we just start expanding once again, I'm going to say we need to expand. It's going to be the same price on mortgage compared to your monthly rent. Why would we want to put the citizens of Bend stuck in a renting unit forever versus them being able to buy a house and have the same mortgage price that their unit would be? It makes more sense to expand and keep building. Because by making all these apartment complexes, what's going to happen? You're going to get less choice. That means less money. Okay, it's going to be more dense, more traffic. It's not going to be happy for anyone. They're already not putting enough parking spots downtown and everywhere else. They're taking parking spots away as of right now. How do we expect people to get to work? Let alone, let's be real, majority of the workforce in Bend comes from other places. So it doesn't make sense to just keep building density. It's not going to work long term. If we're going to destroy more of the citizens of Bend long term, they're not going to be able to get a house. They're going to be struggling as they already are. It doesn't make any sense. It makes more sense to expand the boundary and just build houses. It's going to be the same price for them either way. We can easily make that happen. Thank you.
Jonathan, thank you. Gina?
Affordable rental housing, I think, is going to be a pretty big issue for our community. The city has done a really great job working with developers, and we've had hundreds of units built per year over the last couple of years, and we are, as I believe Steve said, seeing now some rent stabilization. Not that it's affordable, though. So the ideas that I really like are looking at workforce housing, as Megan mentioned. I think that's really promising, and that's an area where the city can provide some incentives and provide some streamlining of permitting and help, kind of help in that way. And the other thing topic that I'll raise that will be unpopular with many people is rent control. Frankly, for affordable rental, we're seeing, if the state is allowing a rent rate increase of 10%, sorry, my voice is a little muted. The state is allowing 10% rent increase annually. That simply is not affordable. And so I think as a city, we need to grapple with that, and we need to think about perhaps working with our legislators at the state level to effect a change there. I'll leave it at that.
Gina, thank you. Megan?
I was proud to stand with the nurses when we were fighting for a better contract with the hospital, and I'll never forget I was at a union meeting, and that you said that the hospital had brought in an economist, and that the economist had said, well, the solution is just move in with each other, have be roommates. And the woman next to me turned to me and said, I'm 45, I don't want a roommate. And so I think that's like getting to the key issue here, right? We have an affordability problem in our city. You have to earn $72,000 to afford a rental in Bend. You have to make $200,000 to be able to maybe get a loan on a median home price. We have our lowest income earners are exiting the housing market because they're either moving in with somebody else or they're entering into homelessness. We have 25% of the people that are in our emergency shelter sleeping on a cot every night go to work every single day. So we know we have a problem. So what is the solution? I feel like the city of Bend has really started to make some serious progress here. And progress is incremental when you're talking about affordability. Like it was mentioned, rents are starting to soften a little bit. The vacancy rates for rentals are actually going up, which is great news. Even home prices are starting to stabilize or go slightly down. So these are small incremental things that are good. And what this means to me is that what the city of Bend is doing is working. That is why we received a $5 million HUD grant to continue working on affordable housing and to get those revolving loans out there and to see how we could streamline processes. It's why our work on the code amendments that we're doing with density and land divisions are starting to work. And we just need to keep doing all of these things and all of the tools at our disposal to make sure that we can get to lower rents and home prices for everybody.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you, Julie. Thank you. Please now welcome Katie Brooks, CEO of the Bend Chamber.
Good evening, and I want to thank everybody for running for office. Good job. It's not an easy thing to do, so thanks so much for your interest in the citizens of Bend. The Bend Chamber has been working on workforce housing in particular in the mid-market area for a few years now. In 2021, we conducted a poll which showed that 67% of the residents polled in Bend either know someone who has had to leave Bend or has decided not to come to Bend. This is workforce folks, because of the price of housing. To us, that's a big red blinking button for workforce development and retention of, in particular, the middle class for us, but anybody in Bend. So as City Council looks at meeting your goals for not just mid-market housing, but also affordable and multifamily housing, really the trifecta probably of holding the workforce, what kind of measurements, what metrics will you use to determine whether or not City Council is meeting those goals? What will you look for that determines success?
All right, each candidate is going to have 1 minute to answer this question. We'll begin with Barb Campbell and we will end with Nick Cervini.
Thank you. Thanks, Katie. As everyone has stated, we are behind 6,000 units in Bend, and the number statewide, it's more than you can even comprehend. Right now, we need housing. We need housing, all types of housing, to be built as quickly as possible, as you've heard from pretty much everyone up here. When I started on council, I've been on council since 2014, and at that time our reports were consumer report style. Katie, if you remember that, little donuts, and if they were half filled in. And now it's dashboards. We've got dashboards to show you progress on everything. Quite frankly, I might take anybody who's working on metrics and put them in the permit department and just get them working on building housing more quickly, because right now there is such a deficit. We need everything. The place where I do think we more information is rental, when we give tax dollars for affordable housing.
Barb, thank you. Steve?
Katie, thanks for running that study. It gave us some data, and I'm a data guy. I teach science for a living. So thank you. Cost burden households are not going to be able to live in the city over the long term. That's 30% of your income going for that. It's tough on the families. It's tough on the environment. I teach climate science as part of my curriculum, so I understand that burden. The city of Bend should continue to track the percent of cost burden houses, the percent of severely cost burden houses, though they're spending more than 50% of their income as well. And I think that new federal grant that we got in, part of that dollars could be more applied to more deeply studying that displacement, those that are moving right now, as well as which AMI sector is most burdened in our town here. And I want to see that track the level of displacement the next time you do that study as another metric for us to see, are we winning or are we losing? Our goal is live in Bend and don't have to spend more than 30% of your income.
Steve, thank you. Chet?
So the big reason that I'm running is to incentivize good behavior and to support the middle class. Those are the two big pieces of why I'm doing all of this work. And kudos to everybody at this table, because it is a lot of work. And the reason for that is so that we can serve the middle class in our town. So I mentioned that 80 to 120% before. These are nurses, firefighters, teachers, entrepreneurs. These are the foundation of our community, and we're letting them down. So again, I mentioned before that two-tiered process, and I wasn't able to quite go into it with more detail. I'd like to do that now. So we talked about how, two-tiered process, incentivize folks to tell the truth, builders to tell the truth, and disincentivize builders who don't tell the truth. That's the basic idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Megan?
Yeah, I thank you for the question. I think that we have a lot of work to do when it comes to workforce housing, like I mentioned, and I think that there's a lot of innovative ways and policies that we can look at when it comes to workforce-specific housing. I also think that, you know, we have a lot of catching up to do. I'm really looking forward to the housing needs analysis that's going to come out from the state, which will tell us how much catching up we need to do. That will really help determine what our targets are. Barb mentioned the dashboard. The city has done some great work really visualizing our goals and actually applying metrics to them. So we are held accountable to those. But there's just frankly so much more that we need to do. I don't want to become like the Bay Area. There was just a recent study where there were 15 new jobs per housing unit. So we really need to make sure that we are catching up, and we need to be streamlining. We need to be.
Thank you, Megan. Jonathan?
You know, to be quite frank, you know, at the beginning, I would say not that many people are moving out of here. Well, there may be, but in the last 4 years, we have over 6.5% of people moving here. So I don't think price for the people that's coming here is not an issue for them, but it is an issue for the people currently living here. Once again, the biggest way to solve that is increasing houses going outwards. You know, it's really that simple. Supply and demand. When we have more houses, it's naturally going to drop. Doesn't matter, you know. And no one's going to be moving here. I guarantee everyone in this room that moved here would have not moved here if this was just like Portland, with 20-story, 10-story, 6-story apartment complex every block. No one would have moved here. We need to keep Bend the way it is and expand outwards. If we want to keep getting tourists, if we want to keep growing, we need to be supporting the businesses and the developers and working with them.
Jonathan, thank you. Sheena?
I think to respond to this question, what I want to talk about is metrics that the city uses. And what I hear when I hear reports from staff to council are about the number of rental units that have been built, and there are several hundred, and everyone is really happy to hear about that. But what they're not hearing about are the smaller scale developments that are coming into the city looking for permits and are not happening. So in my conversations with architects and developers across the city, I've heard of 100 housing units, both rental, a combination of rental and ownership, that were planned and are not moving forward because of infrastructure costs that the city imposed, permitting timelines, et cetera. So I think we do need to expand the metrics that we are looking at as a council and as a community, and how we measure success and how we deal with our housing issues.
Gina, thank you. Megan?
Some metrics that I like to look at are the fact that we've built 1,000 deed-restricted homes in the city of Bend, that we are building more homes per capita than any other city, that we have more than doubled our shelter capacity in under 3 years. You know, we've talked a little bit about our goal-setting process, but I think that's very important because not only is there the dashboard at the end, but we're forgetting about the beginning of the goal-setting process, which is when we take all the input, we've taken all that information, we ask people to come in and talk to us about what they want to see from our city and what metrics they would like us to achieve over the next few years. In my mind, what we should be focusing on is we should be building supply at every level, but we should prioritize where are the biggest gaps? And the biggest gaps are in our lowest income and in our middle income earners in our community. And that's where the incentives and the programs should be focused.
Megan, thank you. Nick?
Okay, so I'm going to try to. We've been at this. I moved here in 2016. Since then, the housing cost has doubled, right? Some people have been on the council since 2014. Others have already been on the council. Yet the cost of housing is only going up. Right now, it might be stabilizing. It's not something that the city council has done. The city council doesn't build houses. They don't do affordable housing. The only thing that happens for affordable housing, or just getting the price housing down, increase the supply and give the power back to the builders that know how to do this, right? Give it back to the association of realtors that can say what they need to have, and give it back to the construction industry so we can get it done. None of these ideas have taken off. It's been the same idea for the last 6 years. And I didn't mean to be a little upset, but it's sad to hear the same thing over and over and nothing happen. Hopefully I have some ideas that are a little bit different. I do think going out, not urban sprawl, we don't want urban sprawl. Bend is a good size the way it is. We could do rural sprawl into the counties. We could do that.
Thank you, Nick. And thank you, Katie. Now we'd like to invite Morgan Greenwood with Central Oregon Builders Association to present a question.
Thank you. Thank you very much for spending your evening with us. Infrastructure costs are a significant factor in housing prices in two ways. Firstly, as infrastructure funding from state and federal sources have dwindled, cities have increasingly shifted infrastructure development onto home builders, the cost of which is ultimately passed on to the home buyer. Secondly, without adequate infrastructure in place, builders are hampered in their ability to increase housing supply. This is true whether infill development is occurring or greenfield lower density development is occurring. What ideas do you have for more creative infrastructure funding sources, and what role do you intend to play in advocating for them?
All right, each candidate will have 1 minute to answer. We're going to begin with Steve Platt, and we will end with Barb Campbell.
Thanks for the question, Morgan. Infrastructure is the backbone upon which our city is built, and you got to have an infrastructure if you're going to build a city. The federal government did pull back the funding on the infrastructure, and so those costs, some of them got shifted onto impact fees. I agree with some of the policies that have been made in terms of the SDC breakpoint for small homes. Those less than 1,200 square feet are getting a lower SDC cost, and that's helping reducing those costs targeted at that sector of the AMI that's wanting right now. We need to continue policy ideas like this. I agree with the affordable housing exemptions for SDCs, those that are below 18% or 80% of the AMI. I'm going to be a staunch advocate of getting more money from the state on that, and I support the middle housing revolving fund to try to continue to work in the center of the problem right here. And I would vote to make this a priority in the next goal setting for cities as we go forward.
Thank you, Steve. Chet?
The past 4 years have been very hard on all folks in our community because of inflation and because of increased costs. We need to be very careful about raising taxes locally. As far as I'm concerned, raising taxes is not on the table at this point. And at the same time, we need to be working with different personality types and building bridges within our government system so that we can work together to tackle these problems. I'm a big fan of going after state funding. There's a lot of programs that come from Salem that we could be taking advantage of. I'm also a big fan of taking advantage of federal programs to enhance our infrastructure so that we can grow out in the best way possible. Good.
Chet, thank you. Megan?
Yeah, we need to be building livable, complete communities, and I think infrastructure is a key piece to that. When you're dealing with projects where there's $2 million for sewer, $50 million for sewer pump stations, not the pretty stuff, the underground stuff. We really need to make sure that we're advocating on the federal and the state level, and I think the city's been doing a good job. Some of our top priorities are requests for infrastructure funding, and we need to keep on asking, we need to keep on doing the work. This helps drive down the costs that get passed on to the home buyer. When I hear a lot of talking about building out, the one concern I have is, we need to make sure that we have the infrastructure for that, and that's really complicated when our only solution is building out.
Megan, thank you. Jonathan?
Yeah, actually, so I've been talking to this one developer I know. The biggest issue most cities have with infrastructure, they usually only build it, plainly it's going to work for the next 20 years, and then they have to redo it every time around. We need to be building it for the next 40 to 60 years, planning long-term out. If we succeed, so the city could grow a lot better long-term. Once again, growing out is the best option out there, especially if we try and maintain Bend for the way it is. Just like Chet was saying, going after state funding and federal funding is extremely important. There's more than doable for making the infrastructure going outwards. It's not that difficult. Cities do it all the time. We can do it as well. At the end of the day, that's the best solution. You either pay the same mortgage rate or you pay the same amount in a rental apartment. The only difference is at the end of the day, you have a house.
Jonathan, thank you. Gina?
Thanks. As a civil engineer and as a project manager who has managed many projects through the planning and permitting process with the city, I have a lot of ideas on infrastructure. First, I believe that the city needs to start right-sizing its infrastructure with respect to roadways. I think some of our roadway construction is really wide, and it's actually leading to other problems like speeding and disincentivizing people from using bikes or even walking. And by right-sizing our roads, we'll be reducing expense on developers and builders. Also, we need to be making sure that if we're asking developers and builders to build infrastructure, that it's part of a cohesive plan. I personally experienced a project where the city didn't know if a water line was needed, and so, but was ready to impose the cost of that on the developer. So things like that really actually, it's details and it's not pretty and it's nitty gritty, but it actually really needs to be looked at and it really needs to be addressed.
Gina, thank you. Megan?
Yeah, I think the infrastructure is a huge concern for us right now. I think we feel it probably most acutely in the southeast, but it's also in other areas of town. That's why last session I went to Salem with Mayor Keebler and we advocated for infrastructure funding from the state. And the one thing we were told was we need to be able to draw a straight line between infrastructure funding and needed housing. And I thought we did that. Unfortunately, they ended up funding some smaller projects, but we are going to continue with that advocacy this session because I think it is important that we do not start going down the path of supplemental SDCs because that is going to raise the cost of housing. Just a few months ago, Rep. Marsh, who is the chair of the Housing Committee, came to the city of Bend, and we were able to talk with a lot of people in this room, and we were able to really tell her what we needed in the city of Bend. And I think that those relationships and that advocacy is going to be key to get us the funding that we need from the state.
Megan, thank you. Nick?
So the beautiful thing about rural expansion is actually it doesn't cost Bend any money in infrastructure because it's entirely outside of Bend, right? So beyond that, if we want to enhance how much money we're bringing in without spending too much, we just need efficiency, property tax utilization, maintain taxes at or near 3%, right? That's required anyway. Streamline administration. I believe our administration has grown 30% in the last term. Speaking of goal setting, the first goal solved by the last city council was a pay raise. I just thought that was great. Community engagement. We could have private-public partnerships to raise funds for big projects we want to do. But other than that, we have the money coming in. We have 3% property tax rate. We're building more houses, a lot more houses. So with that, that's enough money to just do the main projects that we need to sustain the city. The rest can be private-public partnerships and grants.
Thank you. Barb?
Thank you. I'm the chair of the Bend Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is a transportation planning group. But we had funding through the ARPA program, and as chair, I was able to convince the board that we needed to do exactly what Pro Tem Perkins said, which is prioritize the infrastructure that will get us housing. So in that case, it was specifically affordable housing, 2 separate projects along Simpson, and even the director, our regional director for ODOT, was able to see that, yes, this is an important thing to do. Morgan, you're exactly right. Infrastructure costs are exorbitant. Part of it is simply because we're on solid rock. It costs a fortune to dig through solid rock and build sewer pipes, a fortune to get water pipes installed. Again, this is why in, not out is so crucial.
Appreciate that.
Thanks.
We do have a little bit of time for a question that I will ask on behalf of Partners for Affordable Housing before we get to the political risk question from Rooted Homes. So again, this is on behalf of Partners for Affordable Housing. The City of Bend recently adopted a tree code that home builders anticipate will increase home building costs, making affordable and workforce housing hard, if not impossible, to make pencil in Bend. Do you believe any amendments should be made to the new tree code? If so, which ones and why not? You will each have 1 minute. We're going to start with Chet Womble and we will end with Steve Platt.
The tree code is causing a lot of problems, right? There is a class action lawsuit. Some builders have stuck their head up and said that they don't like it. A lot of them aren't sticking their head up. This is becoming a serious problem. If we are going to grow, we're going to have to build. And if we can't make a sacrifice, then I think we're going to have a serious problem on our hands. I love trees. I love shade. Trees are trees that provide shade for buildings, lower energy costs, and I'm a big fan of it. But if it's going to increase housing costs at the cost of saving a few trees, I'm going to lean towards making housing more affordable for our families. I'm good.
Chet, thank you.
Yep.
Megan?
I just want to say in general, I'm supportive of increasing our supply of housing, but I think that we can do both. We can both be pro-environment and increase our housing.
Okay. Megan, thank you. Jonathan?
Yeah, the easiest way to save the trees and keep them around is building out east into the desert, where there's not that many dense trees there. There's juniper trees, there's real juniper trees are all weed anyways, but there's not that many out there. If we build east, that would be a really good way to work with this new amendment, that whatever they're trying to do. Building east is the way for this tree code.
Jonathan, thank you. Gina?
I served on the tree code update committee, and I can tell you that the outcome of that committee process was a compromise. It was a compromise between people who wanted the code to be a lot more stringent and those who wanted to be a lot more loose. So we, I think, struck a middle ground. And I would hope the development community would look not only at the collaborative process of that committee, but also the overwhelming public support to preserve trees in our community. That said, I'm going to take the question in a little bit different direction. In our public right-of-way, trees, there's really no effort to preserve trees, and arguably that is where we need it the most, where trees can shade sidewalks and bike lanes and make walking and biking a more pleasant experience in our community. And so one of the things that I want to do and want to look at is how we preserve trees in our public rights-of-way as well as on private land.
Gina, thank you. Megan?
I think Gina said it best. I was the council liaison to the tree committee. We had 9 long meetings. There were arborists, environmentalists, developers, builders, architects, you name it, on this committee. And when the consensus was reached, nobody was happy, which to me means we created a balanced code. But I think the important thing that we need to think about here is that code is not written in stone. And if there is a project or a series of projects that are not penciling over, and you can say it's because of the tree code, then it's something that council can take a look at again, and we have committed to reevaluating the tree code.
Megan, thank you. Nick?
Yeah, this is a kind of a difficult one to answer. Everybody loves trees, but if you have a property and you have a project that you're about to do, and then all of a sudden, not only are you jumping through all the hurdles to build and bend, now you have an additional hurdle with the tree code. I think there's definitely ways to go about. The one big problem is when you build where the trees are, those trees were selectively there because it was the best place for them to grow. But what I would like to see is less of just a distance measurement type of assessment like they do for the tree code, but more of an enhancing of biodiversity. So you have one area that's completely untouched, and that could serve as a very densely populated area of trees and biodiversity, and that could subset or offset what that developer is doing. I think there is room for that. Other than that, it's kind of I think it's now probably in litigation, and I look forward to kind of working on that in the future.
Nick, thank you. Barb?
You could call our new tree code a clear-cutting code. One of the options developers have is to remove everything from the lot, every blade of grass, every single tree, in which case they have the choice. They can plant the required number of replacement trees themselves, or they can pay the city. And you have to keep those trees alive for 3 years, and that's expensive. So if developers refuse to preserve 20% of trees, if they refuse to preserve an even smaller amount, then yes, they've got to pay to replace those trees. But I was puzzled because Polish took me out for coffee to tell me how much they love trees. Well, Polish has a contract on the COAD property, which is the last big piece of property with huge trees on it, riverfront property, and they are anxious to put homes there.
Steve.
I'm someone who teaches about the impacts of climate science and on the environment, and I understand how heat islands work and how development hits those microclimates. So I share the value with many of our Bend residents that a thriving tree canopy is something that we really want to work towards. It was developed after a long process. It's just like my time in the Middle East, serving all around the world, it's really hard to get a compromise, and when you get one, it's not going to be perfect. But we've got a compromise code, and I think we're going to work forward to that, to look at that in about a year from now. I do think that one of the metrics that we should use for that is, has there been a measurable change in the cost to build? And if so, we need to reevaluate that, because that falls back into our look on the housing supply. I'm not afraid to vote for changes to that bill or to that code if it needs to be reevaluated.
Steve, thank you. We do have time for another additional question because you guys are so efficient tonight. So again, this is from Partners for Affordable Housing. This is just a 30-second answer question. So, as housing advocates, Partners have seen hundreds of units of infill housing be delayed or denied over the years, especially by people in wealthier areas of town with money to spend to fight them. This is unfair to the single mom or dad with 2 jobs who can't show up for a housing hearing. What can we change about the process of approving housing to ensure more geographical equity of where housing that's affordable gets built and fewer vetoes from people who have already secured their housing on something we need so desperately? Again, this is a 30-second answer, and we will begin with Megan Norris and we will end with Chet.
Yes, I think that we need to, housing should be a right, and we should be aligning our code to reflect that, so that projects that come before us are allowed by right. And I appreciate organizations like YIMBY who come out, when I have projects that I am working on and are in support of our projects. We really need supporters coming. I think we're fortunate in Bend that we have a council that understands the importance of housing.
Thank you, Megan. Jonathan?
Yeah, so I think the biggest way to solve this situation is by allowing people to vote, the citizens of Bend to vote. They can mail it in, or they could do it online the day before. It happens a lot with the city council. They're deciding things behind doors without people wanting, like the bike lanes. That's going to be destroying all the business owners downtown when they want to make Minnesota into specifically a bike lane, where it's going to not just cause a whole bunch of traffic, destroy half of the business owners downtown. The citizens didn't want that.
Jonathan, thank you. Gina?
Thanks. So not to be repetitive, but 2 things I already mentioned I think will help to address this issue. One is really taking a look at an overhaul of our development code. There are a lot of projects that get hung up on minor technicalities that wealthy neighbors to projects can hire lawyers to find and exploit, and that's wrong. That's an abuse of our development code. So I think modifications to our development code can help. And then also kind of raising the bar before planning review is required.
Thank you, Gina. Megan?
I call the emails the yes but emails, because they always start with, I love affordable housing, but not in my neighborhood. This is a real big problem in Bend, and one of the things that we're looking at right now is maybe changing the land use notice process. So we're sort of redirecting people away from specific developments to larger policy concerns that they can get involved in. The fact is, vibrant communities are diverse communities, and that includes economic status.
Nick?
So I think a lot of this is kind of ideologically based, where we want to put all types of housing everywhere, and it's really almost offensive to call them like not in my backyard people, the NIMBYs, right? Because that kind of takes any case they have and just says, no, we can't listen to you, you're an NIMBY. They do have really clear reasons why they don't want that to happen, if they're worth being listened to. We also do have enough other land to develop the lower income type housing. Not everybody can live on the Shoes River. It's just not a thing, right? Otherwise I would.
Nick, thank you. Barb?
Thank you. The part of this question that stood out to me is the part about geographical equity. I'm the only city councilor right now who lives east of the river. It could be true that I'm still the only city councilor who lives east of the river. And it's true, that's where most of our affordable housing projects are. My own home is right next door to a facility for folks with severe mental illness, facilities for veterans and for homeless folks. I am so proud of all of those. I've worked so hard.
Thank you,
but
Barb.
Equity.
Steve?
Thanks. During my time working throughout the Middle East, I learned that just because you're loud doesn't mean you're right and doesn't mean you represent the whole. Right here, when a new home is being built in our community, it's not just a neighborhood issue, it's a citywide issue. The lack of housing in any neighborhood affects the whole continuum throughout the city. I take my role as a land use decider seriously, and there are experts that can help advise that decision on the council.
Steve, thank you. Chet?
We have rules for new construction in neighborhoods for a reason. We want to maintain the character and the look in Bend because people love to move here, because it's a great place to raise kids, it's a great place to have a family. Also, the people's voice is democracy. If people have a problem with something to the point where they want to veto it, I don't have a problem with that. And I don't think anybody who believes in our system should either.
Thank you, Chet.
Yeah.
All right, now we get to our final question. Let's please welcome Carl Dinkelspiel, Deputy Director of Rooted Homes, to ask our final question. Thanks for waiting.
Yeah, good. Thank you. All right, so I'd love to hear your plan to increase housing supply and decrease housing costs. And I would especially love to hear what political risk or risks you are willing to take in order to do that.
Okay, again, this is the final question. You will have 2 minutes to answer it. We will begin with Jonathan Curtis, and we will end with Megan Norris.
I believe the biggest solution to make enough affordable housing, quote unquote, for everyone, and especially, the homeless. Like many of the city council members have said, the homeless people, a lot of them do have jobs here. That is a reality. So at the end of the day, it comes down to supply and demand. If we can make more than enough houses, prices will naturally drop. When the prices drop, these people will be able to go out and move in. One of my friends, he recently he was homeless himself, living in one of those places, and he got out. He was able to get a house. He works 2 full-time jobs. That's really all it comes down to, being able to find a house. Let alone, I'm sure most of you guys know, when a house gets put on the market, it's gone within 3 days. That's the biggest issue. We need more houses. It is, to be quite honest, it's extremely simple. That's all it comes down to. We need to be able to work with the developer. It's a lot easier. We need to make, like Nick said before, we need to give it into them. We need to let them be in charge, the builders. We need to let them come here and build. We need to make, the permit process a lot more streamlined. And by being able to do that, it will increase the houses a lot faster. Because the permit process is not streamlined at all. It is holding back a lot of progress that the city of Bend could be making. And, like being said, I was homeless myself. The way I got out of it was actually, the community helping me. And I had a full-time job. I was working here in the school system. I was working at the school, locally, the public school. And I ended up quitting my job to become a wildland firefighter instead while I was homeless. I went to a job pool, did that, and by going to one of these programs, like a lot of the state offers, that's another good benefit, having these trade schools.
Jonathan, thank you. I'm just going to repeat the question one more time, just as it is a 2-part question. What is your plan to increase housing supply and decrease housing costs, and what political risks are you willing to take to achieve it? Gina.
Thank you. My plan to increase housing availability is 2-part. First, and I've mentioned it, but I want to dwell on it a little bit here, and that is our development code. Currently, our development code is leading us to sprawl and to low-density housing, and it's leading us to traffic congestion on our roads, which actually increases the overall cost of living for our people in our community. So I think it is a political risk, actually, to say we need to overhaul our development code. Not to get too wonky, but what a lot of communities are doing are moving to a form-based code. And so starting to say what we want to see in our community as opposed to regulating every little tiny aspect of what a developer might put forward. And that should bring efficiencies to permitting and designing of our neighborhoods and infill housing. And that should help to reduce the cost of housing and promote infill housing in our neighborhoods. The other part of my plan to reduce the cost and increase the availability of housing is looking at streamlining our permitting process and looking at what infrastructure the city actually can require of developers to create a more predictable and reliable process that developers will go through. So I think that will also be politically risky because generally change is hard. And it'll be a learning experience, I think, for city staff, and that may present some political risk. And there may even be members of our community that maybe just don't want to see things change. So that's what I intend to work on.
Thank you, Gina. Megan?
I think first of all, we have to talk about what we have to do. So the state is about to give us numbers soon, and it's going to tell us you have to build X amount of houses in the next 20 years, and we are obligated to build them. So we need to be figuring out how we're going to be able to build this number of homes. I think that the two areas that I would like to focus on in the next year are, everybody, we need to supply at all sectors of the continuum, but there are two sections. One is our lowest income earners. We need to focus on, one thing we did not talk about today is transitional and rapid rehousing for our homeless population. If there is nowhere to go after the shelter, we are missing a major rung in our continuum, and you're going to keep people in our shelter system for years and years to come. And the other is just throw absolutely everything that we can, everywhere we can at middle income housing in this community. I think that we can look at zoning, we can look at the middle income tax exemption, we can look at creative public-private partnerships, we can look at density. I think there's so many things out there that we are just starting to look at with our middle income pilot program, and I want to expand that as much as possible. And when it comes to political risk, I think you all know what I'm going to talk about, and that's homelessness. 4 years ago, I took a huge risk and decided to take on something and lead something, be the face of homelessness on council in our community. And because it was an emergency, because someone needed to do something about it. And it has come, I took this on knowing that there was not one solution for it, or that there potentially was no permanent solution for what I was about to do. And it has come at a huge cost for me, mainly to my mental health, over the past 4 years. But I did it because I noticed a problem and I stepped in and I got something done. And I think that's the kind of counselor that you want on Bend City Council.
Megan, thank you. Nick?
So, one, we need to obviously understand homelessness, but the reality is, in the last few years, we've seen the housing costs double. We've seen the shelter beds double, but also the homeless population fill those shelter beds, and then also have the same amount of population outside of those shelter beds. Speaking of political risk, this is a political risk. A lot of these problems came about with Measure 110 that killed about 5,000 people directly. That was a Democrat thing that happened. And then also House Bill 2001, that happened. Since then, housing has doubled, shelter beds has doubled, but also the homelessness has doubled. $12 million spent in the last 2 years for homelessness, and we have really a 5% reduction, right? And I'm very grateful for that 5% reduction, but I'm also fearful that it's noise. What I want to see is everything I've talked about today, land use reform, taking the political risk to actually go to Democrats. I believe everybody on the city council currently is a registered Democrat, but I'm not positive. I'm an independent, I've always been an independent. I don't have any party to be affiliated with when I'm telling the state that they need to change their laws for Bend, Oregon, because we're on the other side of the mountains. We're not Portland, we're not Salem, we're not Eugene, and we should not be treated as such. We need to have our own set of laws or rules that fit what our demographics look like. Right now, 40% of people move here because of the beauty of Bend. That is unlike any other city. Nobody moves to Portland because it's beautiful, they have a job. Nobody moves to Eugene because it's beautiful, it's because they get a job. They move here because it's beautiful, and they're taking up the houses for people that really need them, like the nurses, like the firefighters, like the police, men and women that serve this city. The way we can address this is taking on the state and their laws and saying, hey, maybe we could actually look at the exclusive farm use where nothing has been farmed ever. It's been there for 50 years. Let's talk about it, and let's have something that can be built out there that doesn't consume resources. And it fits the bill for climate.
Nick, thank you. Barb?
The number that's been spoken today is 6,000 homes short, 6,000 housing units. And as far as I know, yeah, it really might be 6,000. We didn't get to that deficit overnight. And frankly, we are not going to fix that with 30-day permit times or ADUs in everyone's backyard. I have been taking political risks for a decade on city council, and I will tell you, it seems to me that the very riskiest thing is to ask the public for money. We have had to do that over and over again in my terms. We need levies for the fire department to be able to operate at all. Our community passed a transportation bond that is nearly $200 million because they could see with their own eyes the need for that. I think it's time to take another political risk along those lines. I think we need a big injection of cash to actually get thousands of units in a short time. And to me, that looks like a housing bond. It does look like asking the community for some millions of dollars to literally either put into the infrastructure so the developers can get it done, maybe into the actual nuts and bolts bricks of the buildings that we need. I would do that bond. I would combine it with some infrastructure dollars. And I think that instead of only transportation infrastructure dollars, we should also go ahead and include sewer and water, and as well as in transportation. But frankly, I just think some big thing has got to happen. Otherwise, it's just going to continue to be year after year of now we're only 4,000 short. Now we're only 3,000 short. Thanks for the question. It's a really good question.
Barb, thank you. Steve?
My focus is going to be help build out a complete community and all types of housing for all members of our community. I spent 25 years in the Air Force. You've heard me see that tonight, making tough decisions under a variety of conditions. I served throughout the Middle East and in Afghanistan on the ground, where partners had wildly different views about what we were going to do, and we still had to try to build a coalition to move forward. I've gone to speak to congressional representatives who have intensely local perspectives about their districts, and I've had to balance those perspectives along with the goals of the U.S. government and other members of Congress. I've led a number of organizations where you have to diligently seek inputs and you have to be willing to make tough decisions at the end of the day. That's what leaders do. Not everyone's going to be happy with every decision, but the key is to keep your eye on the goal. And my goal is to bring more housing of all types to the city of Bend. That's going to be my North Star. I'm used to and I'm not afraid of making tough decisions to move us towards this goal. So, as a city councilor, where we can reduce cost to build, I'll be open to those options. Where we can increase our supply of all types of housing with a focus on the affordable end of the spectrum, I'll be open to options. Where we can aggressively seek help from the state and the federal monies to reduce costs, I'll be open to options. Where we can reduce timelines for permitting, I'm going to be open to options. And where we can innovate at the city level to target fee reductions to encourage that desired types of housing, I'm going to be open to options. The bottom line here is leaders leads, and even when the going is tough, you're going to make a decision and you're going to move forward. Thanks.
Steve, thank you. Chet?
Thanks, everybody. I was a firefighter for about 10 years down in California, and it was a hard job. A lot of risk was involved, a lot of risk assessment was involved. After leaving the fire department, I started my own risk assessment company, which I still own today. The basic idea is that I go into the corporate world and I solve problems that the company can't solve on their own. So it's all about assessing the risk and then creating a solution that works. And what the pattern that I've seen over the past few years is that we've got too much risk aversion and we don't have enough risk assessment. I'm a big believer in knocking on doors and connecting with the community. The first question that I ask when somebody answers the door is, what kind of changes do you want to see in Bend? What's bothering you about Bend? Number one is traffic. Almost everybody says traffic. Number two is homelessness. Basically, everybody says homelessness, and number 3 is middle income housing. That's my platform. It's based on this community. I believe that government needs to represent the people. And as far as I can see, we've been lacking in that department for the past few years. So I want to listen. I want to listen to the members of this community, and I want to make choices that reflect the desires of our community. I want to be a leader who can lead a better direction for Bend, who can lead the way. And I'd like to close with the idea that federal funds may come with some strings attached. And I'm open to that idea, but as long as it meets the needs of Bend. Thank you.
Chet, thank you.
Yep.
Megan.
Yes, my number one goal is to provide housing that is attainable for our most people that need it most in our community. I want to make sure that I am building a Bend where my 2 girls can come back and live someday, and that our future generations can. It's really important to me. And that takes political risk. We need to make sure that we're standing up for funding for infrastructure, advocating at the state and federal level. We need to make sure that that we are doing all that we can to have housing that is compatible with our climate and that is climate friendly. We also need to make sure that that we are really focusing on housing that that benefits our workforce. And so I will be doing everything that I can to make sure that that we can deliver on those items. And I look forward to working and have a proven track record of working on council, approving thousands of units and also shelter beds. And so we need to continue that good work, but we have a lot more to do, and I'm excited to continue doing that.
Megan, thank you. All right, and thank you, Carl. That was our final question, which brings us to the close of our evening here, which is happening 5 minutes early. So thank you for your efficiency. I also want to thank all of the Bend City Council candidates for sharing your strategies and proposals for lowering the cost of housing for everyone in our community, especially our workforce and low-income community members. Again, thank you also for your efficiency and allowing us to ask a few more questions. And thank you to our partners who are here tonight and all of you who have been watching at home. Please sign up for continued updates at partnersforaffordablehhousing.com. Have a wonderful evening, and don't forget to vote on November 5th.